The Jarkathi Prime Military Academy was a monument to symmetry, silence, and soul-sucking seriousness. Built into the crystalline cliffs of Centurion Theta, its halls echoed with the pristine click of polished hooves, talons, and whatever counted as feet among the galaxy's most elite military species. Generals were born here, tactics were baptized in simulations that could make a neutron star weep, and the walls themselves judged anyone walking them who dared to blink too slowly. So when the Academy's Xeno Studies Combat Theory class received a combat essay submission from a human, the reaction was uncharitable. Professor Glarnvux of the 13th Mind, a 12-eyed, calcite-skinned intellectual terror who had never laughed in his 7-decade tenure, made the mistake of reading it aloud in front of the class. Tactical disruption via improvisational psychotic episode, he recited, his voice a gurgling blender of contempt. By Cadet Maxine Max Harlow, species, human, planet of origin, Earth, combat experience, bar fight at something called Space Applebee's. The class roared with laughter, though none dared actually emote in front of Glarnvux, so the sound came out as a series of suppressed gasps, feather fluffings, and one species that released a respectful cloud of spores. Step 1, Glarnvux continued, oozing disdain like a fine oil spill, get naked, not suggestively, confusingly, commit to it emotionally. He paused, letting the horror settle. Step 2, aggressively declare you are in psychic communication with the enemy's mother and that she is disappointed. He blinked all 12 eyes slowly. There is no tactical precedent for this. This isn't combat theory. This is a drunken performance art piece gone rogue. At the back of the amphitheater, slouched with the kind of casual arrogance that only came from someone who once tried to mug a vending machine and won, Max Harlow sucked on a lollipop and raised a hand. Yes, human, Glarnvux sneered. I stand by every word, your professional dryness, especially the part where you set a sock on fire and declare it a religious rite. That one's key. You set your own sock on fire. It was a statement. It was arson. Max grinned. For the next week, the essay circulated through the entire academy. Most students treated it like an Interstellar meme, so bafflingly ridiculous that it had to be passed around for entertainment. Mid-level instructors scoffed, higher-ups dismissed it, and Glarnvux, nursing what he called a cranial ulcer of pedagogical indignation, filed a formal recommendation that the human be reassigned to food preparation. 2 weeks later, the Krylian Confederacy declared a surprise invasion. Centurion Theta was on the front line. The Academy was evacuated. And because the galaxy has a perverse sense of humor, the only available person left in the command center of the northern defensive grid was Max. The rest of the command crew had evacuated to the lower bunkers. Max, meanwhile, had overslept in the ventilation shaft after losing a bet to a Hraken cadet who insisted their digestive system could process a bicycle. The alarms didn't wake her. The smell of panic did. She sat up, adjusted the half-functional combat vest she'd tied into a makeshift crop top, and squinted at the control panels, blinking red like a disco having a heart attack. Right, she muttered, showtime. The Krylian Confederacy was everything the Jarkathi military prized: orderly, strategic, hierarchically rigid, and absolutely humorless. Their warships advanced in perfect formation, their soldiers moved in synchronized trios, and their invasion broadcasts came with correct grammar and optional subtitles. By the time the Academy's formal defense plan uploaded to the grid, Max had already scribbled her own version on a napkin. It involved 12 mannequins, a bag of glitter, and a looped soundbite of a duck screaming. The Krylians landed their first strike team precisely 2.3 kilometers from the northern grid. They expected resistance. What they got was a smoke machine, an inflatable tube man wearing a crown, and Max Harlow standing barefoot in a trench coat screaming, "You're late for your psychic spa treatment." The Krylian captain, a five-lobed creature with a natural hatred of improvisation, froze mid-command. "Is this a hostage?" one of his lieutenants asked. "No, it appears to be a ritual of some kind." Max hurled a rubber chicken at them. It bounced off the captain's sensory lobe and squeaked in a way that some Krylian religious doctrines considered prophetic. Moments later, the squad fell back in total confusion, convinced they'd stumbled onto an unsanctioned Terran war rite. Word spread fast, too fast. Krylian Command received fragmented reports. Human warlock initiating psychological warfare. Unpredictable energy surge from Sock effigy. Conflicting spiritual aura, possibly the god of disco rage. Krylian Command hesitated. The Academy wasn't supposed to have active human defenses. There hadn't even been any Terran tactical patterns in the local database. What they had now was this. Glarn Vux, watching the feeds from the safe zone, stared in horrified fascination. This can't be happening," he whispered. Behind him, a junior instructor, a Lithari with stress-induced molting, whispered, "Sir, she's repelling coordinated Krylian assaults with a kazoo and a manifesto written in ketchup." Glarn Vux watched Max dance barefoot atop the Academy's East Tower, waving a flare and chanting something about ancestral tax fraud. The Krylian second wave had just tripped over her glitter mines and retreated when she declared that she had ascended emotionally. "This is not combat," Glarnvux hissed. But the war feeds said otherwise. She was winning. And worst of all, he was starting to understand how. Glarnvux had been alive long enough to see the fall of empires, the collapse of star unions, and the universally reviled Jibnar peace accord where someone had accidentally signed with a mustard stain. But never in his rigid, rule-bound existence had he seen a tactical doctrine so utterly heretical succeed with such violent efficiency. Max Harlow had repelled 3 consecutive Krylian strike teams using only scavenged Academy props, raw audacity, and a playlist labeled Personal Meltdown Mix Vol. 4. The Krylian Command now listed her as an unstable dimensional anomaly in their threat database. One unit even tried to consult a war priest before launching their next assault, which delayed the attack by 6 hours and ended with a religious schism over whether or not Max was a prophesied chaos avatar. The northern defensive grid, once considered an irrelevant structure with aesthetic windows, was now the central node of the resistance. The few cadets left behind had begun treating Max like some war deity. Someone made her a throne out of cafeteria chairs. She accepted it while flipping through a manual upside down and muttering, "Tactical feng shui, baby." Meanwhile, deep in the safety of the underground command complex, Glarnvux sat surrounded by trembling junior staff and increasingly nervous automated AI scribes. "This defies every principle of organized warfare," he muttered. "She's not even following a plan." "Sir," one brave voice piped up. She annotated her ketchup manifesto. "With what?" "Crayons, sir." Glarnvux's calcite fingers twitched. The problem, and he hated this with the passion of 1,000 standardized tests, was that Max's results were statistically flawless. 0 casualties, maximum disruption, psychological destabilization of the enemy to the point that Krylian ships were now landing off target, fearing some sort of guerrilla interpretive dance ambush. The data models had gone from predictable loss to unquantifiable anomaly cluster. A buzz from the console drew his gaze. Live Combat Feed Northern Grid Operation, Panic Salsa. Max had apparently renamed her defense plan again. The feed lit up. A Krylian strike mech, 3 stories tall and loaded with missile pods, clanked into the courtyard. Max stood in front of it, holding a sign that read, "No MECHS after midnight." She had painted her face like an extinct Terran clown and was wearing a cape made of emergency blankets. The mech paused. Max pointed directly at the cockpit, yelled, "Your dad's in there," and then detonated a series of synchronized air horns tied to confetti mines. The mech flinched. A multi-ton war construct with a hardened AI combat brain hesitated. The pilot panicked and ejected sideways, midair, into a tree. Max did a cartwheel, fell over, and declared it a tactical feint. Glarnvux clutched at his face. She weaponized failure. She's conducting warfare with intentional incompetence. "No, sir," said a jittery Zenthari analyst. "She's conducting warfare with performative madness. There's an internal logic, a pattern of strategic antilogic." Glarnvux twitched again. "She fakes being erratic to predictably destabilize the enemy. That's." "Genius, sir," the analyst offered. Glarnvux hissed like a kettle of angry lizards. 2 days later, Krylian High Command issued a formal ceasefire in her direction only. They offered a separate truce for the Harlow Zone, citing irreconcilable tactical incompatibility. Max rejected the offer by mailing them a live possum painted gold with a note that said, "No take-backs." The Krylians began retreating. She won not by overwhelming force, not by superior numbers, but by sheer, exhausting chaos. Back in the academy, what was left of it, the survivors stood in the courtyard watching Max attempt to roast marshmallows over the wreckage of a missile pod. Her feet were up on a Krylian hover tank. She wore mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. A few cadets timidly approached. "Commander Harlow," one of them said, bowing awkwardly, "your methods were unorthodox but effective. We wish to learn to adopt your teachings." Max blew a marshmallow into the air and caught it in her mouth. "Cool, lesson 1, never trust a ferret in a hat." The cadets blinked. "You'll get it later," she added. "Lesson 2, if the rules say you can't win, rewrite the rules, or break them with interpretive mime combat." A low hum descended over the courtyard. Glarnvux arrived in his personal hoverchair, face locked in a complex expression somewhere between scholarly revulsion and a spiraling existential crisis. "Human," he said at last. Max saluted ironically. "I reviewed your essay, again. Oh, you find my sock fire compelling this time." "Yes." Max's eyebrows lifted so high they nearly evacuated her skull. "It worked. It's a masterpiece of weaponized illogic. You created a mental fog of war using your own perceived incompetence. By performing chaos, you imposed it. The enemy could not prepare because there was no structure to prepare against. You turned warfare into an abstract performance, like a sentient fever dream." "Oh, Professor, you're gonna make me blush under all this camouflage glitter." Glarnvux inhaled slowly. "I request your cooperation. I wish to study you." "Hot. Academically. Still hot." He ground his mandibles together. Max smirked. "So what's the plan, Prof? Gonna institutionalize my madness?" I believe I must. The Academy has been wrong. Our doctrines are inflexible. Our enemies evolve. You are a human scalpel of disruption, and we have been trying to fight with bricks." "Better make sure your bricks don't mind being clowned," Max said, standing, "because I don't play fair." "I know. And I will set things on fire, frequently. I have accounted for this." Max stretched, then offered a hand. "Fine, I'll help, but only if I get tenure." "You are not faculty." "I am now. I'm the new Chaos Tactics professor." "You can't just declare yourself, Too late, I already made the syllabus. It's written in salsa." Glarnvux stared at her. Then, to the shock of every student in the courtyard, he emitted a dry, strangled chortle. A laugh, a tiny, broken laugh. "Human," he rasped, "you are a walking academic disaster." "Professor," Max said, slipping her mirrored shades back on, "I'm the future." She slapped the side of the hover tank and drove it in a circle, screaming "WHEE," while a boom box blared Terran ska music from its mangled hull. Glarnvux watched the slow, lurching spiral of exhaust and flame with a sigh. The future, he realized, was going to be very loud. The official announcement from Jarkathi Prime Military Academy came exactly 17 hours after Max Harlow hotwired a vending machine to deliver motivational quotes instead of snacks. The message was short, brutal, and caused 2 departments to collapse from cultural whiplash. Maxine Harlow, human, appointed acting adjunct strategic consultant in disruptive warfare, probationary tenure pending sanity evaluation. The sanity evaluation never happened. Because the next day, a faction of rogue Arcturian shock priests declared war. Not for resources, not for territory, not even because they were particularly offended. No, they wanted to destroy the Academy because they believed Max's tactics were a heretical insult to the sanctity of honorable war. That, and one of them got concussed by a boot filled with mayonnaise during her last training demo. The academy scrambled for readiness. Max rolled in on a hover skateboard made from leftover missile fins, wearing a poncho made of survival blankets and an oxygen mask for no discernible reason. A student asked what the plan was. Max popped the mask off, panic, then improvise in that order. Glarnvux, standing beside her with an academic datapad and a fresh twitch in his leftmost eye, did not sigh. He had run out of size 3 assaults ago. Instead, he just asked, "Do you at least have some sort of outline?" Max grinned. "Professor, I wrote this one in invisible ink. On a ferret, you'll have to feel the plan." He stared at her. "I'll take that as consent," she said cheerfully. The Archery assault began at dawn. They descended in mirrored warpods shaped like judgmental pineapples, chanting mathematically precise oaths of vengeance and demanding ritual single combat. Max greeted them by declaring trial by dodgeball. With grenades. The academy courtyard, previously a place of quiet drills and posturally correct salutes, turned into a carnival of havoc. Smoke flares erupted in pastel colors. War drums were replaced with dubstep. Several units of Arcturians attempted to follow protocol, only to find their advance blocked by illusionary holograms of increasingly surreal obstacles. A crying goose, a floating fish wearing a monocle, and what appeared to be a motivational poster of Max flipping them off. Glarnvux, narrating to the emergency tactical archive in real time, could barely keep up. Subject Harlow has implemented correction, deployed, a new field tactic she refers to as the War of Interpretations. She is countering structured offense with abstract symbol confusion. Enemy units are dividing as they argue over what any of this means. On the front lines, one Arcturian commander was attempting to decode a projected haiku that simply read, "Fire is my leg. Lunch is not a strategy. Unless you panic." He fell to his knees, sobbing. Max, from the top of the academy's roof, yelled, "I am the sandwich you fear at 3 a.m., and fired a glitter cannon into the wind. The Arcturian front collapsed shortly thereafter. Later that evening, Max held an impromptu seminar titled Weaponized Whimsy in You, How to Psych Out a Species with More Eyeballs Than Brain Cells. Attendance was mandatory. It was held in the wrecked gymnasium. Half the walls were still smoldering. She had drawn a diagram using juice boxes. Glarnvux sat in the back, scribbling furiously on his datapad while muttering, "This is either educational malpractice or a new military doctrine. Possibly both." Max pointed to the diagram. "So right here is where the enemy expects structure. What do we give them?" A cadet raised a cautious claw. "Unstructured panic." "Chaotic intent with layered narrative absurdism," Max corrected. "We look like we're improvising, but we're not. We're deliberately disrupting the expectation of pattern. It's like jazz, if jazz was played by a feral raccoon in a jetpack." The cadet nodded slowly, uncertain whether he was being recruited or indoctrinated. Max continued, "And over here, this is the oh no zone. You don't fight here, you exist. Emotionally, weaponized doubt, become the philosophical crisis." Another cadet, clearly shaken, whispered, "Is she serious?" "Statistically, yes," Glarnvux murmured. "Functionally, she may be a war-based psychological event." Meanwhile, other academies across the Confederacy were watching. Max's tactics, now tagged as Harlowian disruption, were spreading, not officially, not yet, but on forums, in quiet meetings, in desperate after-action reports where conventional doctrine had failed, her name kept showing up. A squad in the dust wastes won a skirmish by staging a fake wedding between two tanks. Another in orbit over Gliese 37 deployed a dance battle to delay boarding long enough to reroute reinforcements. Max had become a contagion of tactical madness. And Glarnvux, much to his horror, was becoming her advisor. He began conducting formal studies. He dissected her movements, transcribed her slogans, analyzed the battlefield psychology of declaring your boots leg prisons, and challenging the enemy to a staring contest with a stuffed owl named Chairman Hoot. His conclusion: it worked. Because while every other doctrine assumed rational escalation, Max removed the rational. She introduced doubt. Doubt became hesitation. Hesitation became failure. Her tactics weren't about defeating structure, they were about disqualifying its relevance. One night, deep in the Academy's data vaults, Glarnvux watched a slow replay of Max's last maneuver. She'd leapt from a hover platform onto a Krylian interceptor while singing what analysts believed was a Terran children's serial jingle. She disabled the pilot with a pie to the face and a legally distinct version of the Macarena. He turned to the assistant AI. Cross-reference all known doctrines with the Harlow maneuver subset. What's the predicted success rate in high-chaos theaters? The AI paused. 87%. However, it contains over 200 variables deemed nonsensical. Reclassify, Glarnvux ordered, from nonsensical to Harlowian logic framework. Start building a syllabus. He rubbed his face. May the stars help us all. The first interstellar academic brawl in recorded history began over a footnote. Specifically, a footnote in Glarnvux's newly published preliminary compendium of Harlowian tactical theory, which cited tactical karaoke as a viable morale disruption vector. A coalition of tenured strategy professors from the Galactic Order of Structured Conflict filed an official protest, claiming the very phrase was an affront to centuries of blood-soaked reason. In retaliation, Max challenged them to a duel. Not a standard duel. No pistols, no ceremonial blades, no 12-step form submission. She challenged them to a battle of interpretive tactical theatrics, which turned out to involve two goats, a fog machine, and a rendition of Hamlet where everyone was armed with foam swords and deeply unresolved trauma. She won. No one could quite explain how, but the order quietly dropped the protest, declared a sabbatical, and one professor now lives in a cave muttering about the subtext of that damn goat. Back on Centurion Theta, the Jarkathi Prime Military Academy was transforming. Slowly, grudgingly, like a sentient filing cabinet learning to party. Traditional combat classes were now paired with unorthodox tactical improvisation modules, and the phrase maximized chaotic vector application had been institutionalized into the official curriculum under Section 42B, directly beneath grenade safety and how not to die immediately. Max was, of course, delighted. She now had an office, technically. It was the old storage closet in the East Wing, refurbished with beanbags, strobe lights, and an animatronic squirrel that screamed motivational phrases when you walked in. Glarnvux visited once a week, for academic purposes and blood pressure monitoring. "This office is a crime," he said during one visit, navigating a minefield of chewed wires and suspiciously damp dartboards. "It's a vibe," Max replied, sipping something from a mug labeled, "I void warranties, not wars." He handed her a datapad. "Our latest simulation results. Your cadets managed to confuse the algorithm so thoroughly it mistook them for terrain." "Nice, that's the goal, become the battlefield, occupy it spiritually." Glarnvux rubbed his eye cluster. "You've single-handedly dismantled 3 centuries of tactical orthodoxy." Max spun in her chair. "And yet my coffee budget is still 0. Justice is a myth." Outside her door, the newly formed Department of Creative Warfare was chaos incarnate. Cadets painted their armor in emotionally symbolic patterns. One duo developed a combat technique based entirely on synchronized juggling. Another replaced standard formation calls with interpretive sound effects. The results, startling. Simulated enemy units had a 64% higher retreat rate. Casualties in mock engagements dropped. Morale soared. And in one memorable exercise, a mock boarding party surrendered preemptively after witnessing a performance titled, "We Are the Dissonant Flan." Glarnvux could no longer deny it. Max wasn't just effective, she was contagious. Which made her next idea even worse. "Field test," she declared one morning. "No," he replied without looking up. "It's time." "No. We take the cadets on a live mission." Glarnvux looked up, slowly, as if staring at a toddler holding a lit match near a fuel barrel. "You want to deploy students, half of whom believe strategic camouflage means dressing as giant inanimate fruit, into a real hostile zone." "Yes. Absolutely not." 2 hours later, they were on a dropship heading toward an active insurgency on planet Volgath Roman 4. Glarnvuk sat in the corner, visibly leaking stress. You lied to me. I improvised consent, Max said. You forged my retinal scan. Tomato, tomato. The cadets were prepped, kind of. One wore a chicken costume for morale optics. Another had a drone swarm shaped like punctuation marks. They had names for their maneuvers now: the reverse piñata, passive-aggressive blitz, emotional thermonuclear disruption, and somehow, terrifyingly, they worked. Volgath Roman IV was a mess. Warlords, fragmented militias, and enough black market tech to start a civil war on accident. Conventional forces had failed to pacify it for years. Max didn't pacify it, she bewildered it into peace. Her team arrived in a nonlinear phalanx, blaring saxophone solos from mounted speakers and dropping glitter-laced pamphlets titled, "Have you considered not being a jerk today?" The first militia they encountered surrendered under the impression they had hallucinated the entire thing. The second tried to fight. Max's response was to throw a peace parade at them. Half of the enemy joined out of curiosity. The other half stopped fighting to watch a cadet hula hoop a fragmentation grenade into a supply cache. The third militia was disbanded entirely after Max challenged its leader to a karaoke duel and sang so aggressively off-key that several bystanders fell to their knees and reevaluated their life choices. By the time the Confederacy's official envoy arrived, the war zone had been converted into a chaotic art commune that served soup. Max met the envoy at the edge of the new non-aggression interpretive sculpture park, wearing a top hat and roller skates. The envoy, visibly unprepared, asked, "What happened here?" Max offered him a smoothie and replied, "Emotional victory, mostly. Also some property damage." Glarnvuk, standing behind her with a stack of reports, added, "Statistically speaking, it was a 98% reduction in hostilities." The envoy looked between them. "You broke a war with a joke." "No," Max corrected, "with the right joke at the wrong moment, repeatedly." The success caused a rift. Other institutions began questioning everything. Some demanded adoption of Max's teachings, others declared them a dangerous anomaly. A few attempted to replicate her methods and ended up with injuries involving mime acts and a tragically misused fog cannon. The Galactic Defense Council summoned Glarnvux for a formal review. He gave them a single datapad. It contained 37 documented instances where Harlowian tactics outperformed conventional doctrine. None of them were explainable in traditional language. The council was horrified. "We can't teach this." "You already are," Glarnvux replied. "But it's insanity. Insanity that wins." There was a long silence. Finally, the Speaker of the Council, a being composed entirely of shimmering gas and bureaucratic spite, whispered, "What have we unleashed?" Glarnvux didn't answer. He was already writing the next textbook. Its title, Strategic Anarchy, Volume 1. And its dedication to the chaos we try to suppress and the humans who laugh at our attempts. They held the first Galactic War Symposium on nonlinear tactical paradigms in a defunct orbital mall once used for deep space tax audits. It had a haunted food court and an echo that made every declaration sound slightly sarcastic. Max insisted on the location because, in her words, nothing inspires revolution like the ghost of retail failure. Representatives from over 90 systems attended, most expected academic discourse, papers, polite arguments over missile velocity ratios, maybe a ceremonial duel fought with antique bayonets and passive-aggressive footnotes. What they got was Max Harlow rappelling in from the ceiling on an improvised harness made of parachute cord and snacks. "Welcome to the circus of CONSEQNCES," she yelled mid-descent. "Seminar SDARTS now." A delegate from the Zarthelian fleet fainted. The next 4 hours were a fevered dream of applied nonsense and inconvenient genius. Max demonstrated 6 unorthodox battlefield strategies, none of which involved standard weaponry, but all of which resulted in statistically significant enemy retreat scenarios. There was the empathy bomb, deploying a loudspeaker loop of emotionally devastating Terran poetry, while projecting the face of the enemy's mother, saying she's just not angry, just disappointed. Tactical misdirection through interpretive culinary theater. A full-course meal presented mid-firefight with dishes symbolizing moral ambiguity resulted in 3 enemy platoons defecting due to complex feelings. Operation Existential Uno, surprise card game ambush during diplomatic standoff. Winner gets the high ground, loser contemplates the futility of hierarchical conflict. Midway through, Glarnvux tried to provide scholarly context. Tried. This methodology, he began, tapping nervously on his lectern, is rooted in post-linear threat disruption theory. It functions by replacing predictive combat escalation with abstract vector confusion. It is. He looked up from his notes. Max was juggling drones. In a sombrero. The crowd was riveted. Unexplainable and yet unstoppable. The room exploded in polite civil war. Half the delegates were demanding to implement Harlowian theory across their academies. The other half were burning their credentials and wailing that warfare was dead and nothing made sense anymore. Max took it as a win. The symposium ended with her leading a conga line through the emergency evacuation tunnel while chanting, "Disorder is just order in a fun hat." The Confederacy ratified the Max Protocols 2 days later. From that point forward, military doctrine across the quadrant began to fracture gloriously. Entire units were restructured into chaotic insertion cells, trained to exploit pattern recognition failure and weaponize absurdity. Drill instructors learned irony. War manuals included emotional intelligence rubrics. One elite recon team adopted clown makeup as part of their official insignia. Their kill record tripled. Max was now a legend, a problem, a saint of disruption. Some cultures worshipped her. Others outlawed her name. All feared her. She still taught at the academy. Her classroom now had a disco floor. One wall was just a mirror with "You are the threat" scrawled across it in lipstick. Glarnvux continued as her reluctant co-instructor, co-author, and intergalactic handler. He now had a permanent migraine and a cult following of students who quoted his early academic papers as sacred texts. "Professor," one cadet asked during a workshop, "what's the core of Harlowian theory?" Glarnvux sighed. "It is the act of performing unpredictability with such confidence that reality itself yields in confusion." Max threw a banana at him. "Correct," she yelled. She began writing her next book, Punchline Warfare, a guide to combat through absurd commitment. The dedication read, "To everyone who said you can't do that, I did. It was hilarious. They surrendered." The Confederacy began building a new branch of military service, the Department of Asymmetric Cognitive Engagement. Max refused the director position. "Too many meetings," she said. "Also, I don't want to be in charge. That implies I care about structure." They made her a mascot instead. A 6-meter-high statue outside the academy gate shows her mid-cartwheel, one boot flying off, grinning like a banshee. Underneath, the plaque reads, "MAXINEHARLOW, Strategic Anomaly, Human Chaos Vector, SHE came, SHE saw, SHE set her sock on fire." Glarnvux visits the statue sometimes, usually at night, when no one's watching. He stares at the ridiculous pose, the triumphant sneer, the unlit cigarette behind one ear. "I tried to fail you," he mutters. "You turned it into a movement." Behind him, cadets practice a drill involving rubber chickens and conflicting slogans. One salutes the statue. Another trips over a tambourine mine. Max's legacy spreads like wildfire through the stars, not as a conqueror, not as a general, but as proof. Proof that brilliance doesn't need permission, that madness, when directed, can be sharper than any blade, that sometimes the ultimate strategy is simply refusing to play the game at all, and making everyone else wonder what game you were playing.